2 words. That's all it took to set an entire league on fire. Not the foul, not the ejection, not even the flagrant review that stopped a national broadcast dead in its tracks. 2 words, posted with no context, no explanation, straight to the internet. And by the next morning, this wasn't a basketball story anymore. It was a cultural war zone, and the league at the center of it had almost nothing to say. Stick around, because what happened after that post is the part nobody's talking about enough, and it might be the biggest scandal of the WNBA season. Let's go back to the beginning, because the order matters more than people realize. August 8th, 2026. Indiana Fever on the road at the United Center, facing the Chicago Sky, nationally televised. This wasn't some quiet midweek matchup buried on a streaming app nobody watches. This was the Fever, the most watched team in the entire league this season. The team that turns every single road trip into a sellout and every single possession into something that gets clipped, reposted, and argued about online before the final buzzer even sounds. That kind of attention changes the air in a building. Players feel it. Coaches feel it. Everybody knows the footage is going to be dissected from every angle by sunrise. First quarter. Sophie Cunningham breaks into transition with a clean step on the defense, rising for what should have been the easiest kind of finish in basketball, an uncontested fast break layup. Instead, DiJonai Carrington comes flying in from behind and catches her across the head and neck, hard enough to twist her sideways in the air. Somehow the shot still falls. Cunningham's landing does not go nearly as smoothly. She slams into the hardwood, and for a second the whole arena just freezes, the kind of silence a crowd holds right before it decides how loud it's about to get. The officials don't shrug this one off. They stop play immediately and head to the monitor for a full review, every camera angle, frame by frame, because what they saw live already looked like more than a routine foul. When they come back, the call gets upgraded to a flagrant foul too. The explanation from the officiating crew is blunt: wind up, impact, and follow through high across the neck. That's not a vague judgment call that could have gone either way depending on who's reffing that night. That's the textbook definition the rulebook uses to separate a hard, physical foul from something excessive and unnecessary. A flagrant 2 carries one automatic consequence: ejection. Carrington is out of the game immediately, but Cunningham isn't just standing there and taking it either. She springs up almost instantly, visibly furious, closes the distance to Carrington, and there's a shove before both benches and the officials rush in to keep it from boiling over into something even messier. Indiana holds on to win 90-86. On any other week, that's the entire headline. A gritty road win, another data point in a Fever season that's already rewritten the league's viewership numbers from top to bottom. But this wasn't any other week, and within minutes of the final horn, the score wasn't the story anymore. Here's the part that got buried in almost every early report, and it's the piece that actually explains why the referees made the call they made. This was not Carrington's first flagrant foul of the season. It wasn't even her second. Earlier in the year, she picked up a flagrant for a hit to the head of Minnesota's Jessica Shepard in the season opener. Then another one landed after contact with Seattle's Skylar Diggins-Smith. Again, high contact, again around the head. 2 separate flagrant fouls on 2 different opponents, in 2 different games, before August had even started. Analysts and close followers of the league were already talking about the pattern before this incident ever happened. So think about the position the review crew was actually standing in on August 8th. They weren't grading one isolated clip out of nowhere. They were grading a nationally televised play against a full season of context. A season where this exact player had already been flagged twice for the same category of high-risk, high-contact plays. A third flagrant, against a different opponent, in front of a national audience, from a player already known across the league as someone who wasn't going to let a hit like that go unanswered. For the review team, that's about as close to an easy call as this sport gets. And yet in that first wave of social media reaction, almost none of that history made it into the conversation. The story that formed in those first minutes was loud, it was fast, and it skipped straight past the basketball context and went directly to the 2 words Carrington posted the moment she got to the locker room. Before we get to that post, though, let's talk about Cunningham's response, because it wasn't what anybody expected from a standard post-game press conference. If the league was hoping she'd give the usual non-answer, the safe, coached, say-nothing routine athletes give reporters every night of the season. She didn't play along. Asked directly whether she thought the foul was intentional, she didn't hesitate. She said she felt it was unnecessary, that she had no prior issue with Carrington, and that she wasn't going to just absorb a hit like that without reacting. Her words were direct. She popped up. She wasn't going to let anyone do that to her, and she figured everyone already knew that about her. Then she went further, into territory most of the coverage treated as a footnote, but that actually hit harder than anything else she said that night. Asked point-blank about the white privilege post that was already circulating while she was still getting dressed in the locker room, she didn't dodge it. She said flatly that this had nothing to do with race, that she'd done the exact same thing last year, gotten ejected for it, and knew she deserved it, and that there was no reason to play that card here. That last year comment wasn't a throwaway line. It was a receipt. Cunningham herself was ejected for a flagrant foul back in 2025. Part of the same reputation she's built as a player who lives right on the edge of the rulebook and never complains when the whistle catches her there too. By bringing that up completely unprompted, she wasn't just rejecting the framing in the abstract. She was pointing straight at her own history and daring anyone in that room to explain why the standard should suddenly be different this time. What people kept talking about afterward wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. No deflecting, no waiting on a team statement to speak for her. No safe, hollow non-answer. She handled the basketball question and the much harder cultural question back to back, in the same breath, without blinking. In a league where post-game availability usually turns into a parade of nothing, that kind of bluntness stood out, and it stood out even more given exactly what she was responding to. Because minutes after her ejection, DiJonai Carrington had opened her phone and posted 2 words on Threads, tagged directly at the Indiana Fever: white privilege. No sentence around it. No explanation of what she meant or what exactly she was referring to. Just 2 words fired straight into a sports internet that was already replaying her foul on loop from every angle. The reaction split almost instantly down predictable lines. Some pointed out that Carrington studied African and African American studies at Stanford and argued she was reaching for something bigger than one single play. A systemic point about how physical fouls get judged differently depending on who's throwing them and who's absorbing them. That the ejection itself wasn't really the target, the pattern behind it was. Others called the post reckless, full stop. Their argument was simple. You can't take a clean officiating decision, one that was reviewed frame by frame and upgraded on its own merits by a crew with zero motivation to protect one player over another, and turn it into a racial flashpoint minutes after hitting an opponent across the head and neck. Whatever academic weight the phrase might carry in a classroom, attaching it to this specific play, on this specific night, with zero context, was always going to land as a direct accusation, no matter what the intent behind it actually was. Even the 2 head coaches couldn't agree. Fever coach Stephanie White said she believed the call was the correct one, while also saying she didn't think Carrington meant to hurt Cunningham. A careful answer that agrees with the ejection while still giving Carrington the benefit of the doubt on intent. It's the kind of answer that satisfies nobody looking for a clean villain, which is probably exactly why she gave it. Sky coach Tyler Marsh saw it differently from the jump, saying live, before he'd even seen the replay, that he thought Carrington was simply making a play on the ball. 2 days later, after the footage had been broken down from every possible angle, Marsh hadn't really moved off that position. He kept defending his player's intent and pushed back on what he called inconsistent officiating, while also acknowledging, carefully, that Carrington had faced real vitriol since the post went up, and that when the league talks about protecting its players, that protection has to apply to everyone, not just whoever happens to be on the sympathetic side of a given controversy. By Sunday morning, this had already jumped out of the sports pages and into general news and opinion sections, the kind of crossover that only happens when something taps into a much bigger nerve than the sport itself. Columnists who hadn't written a single word about the WNBA all season were suddenly filing hot takes. Cable panels were breaking down a Threads post the way they'd normally break down a Senate hearing. And the one organization actually responsible for setting the standard here, the league itself, had said almost nothing at all. So what did the WNBA actually do? Carrington was fined $1,000 in connection with the ejection and the post. That's it. That's the entire sum of the league's public response to a controversy that had been running non-stop across national media for 48 straight hours. No suspension, no follow-up statement addressing the post directly, no clarification of what standard the league actually applies when a player responds to an already reviewed, already upheld officiating decision with racially charged language. And the clearest signal of just how far that silence went came Monday night, when Carrington suited up and played completely normally against the Seattle Storm, checking in with just over 5 minutes left in the first quarter, like the previous 48 hours had never happened. Now here's the comparison that has people around the league genuinely uncomfortable. Just weeks before this game, a co-owner of the Seattle Storm was suspended and fined by the league after confronting 2 teenage fans in a parking lot who were holding up a sign supporting Cunningham's own publicly stated position on transgender athletes in sports. That suspension came fast. The league made a statement, took action, and it was covered at the time as proof the WNBA takes conduct seriously. Now put that next to this. One incident involves a team executive saying something to a couple of teenagers outside an arena. The other involves a flagrant foul on national television, an ejection, a racially loaded social media post that dominated sports media for 2 full days, and a player back on the floor within 48 hours with nothing more than a fine most fans didn't even know had happened until reporters went digging for it. That's not a small inconsistency. That's a gap wide enough to drive a truck through, and the timing made it worse, because Commissioner Kathy Engelbert had already sent teams a memo days before this game acknowledging that discussions around transgender athlete participation were still ongoing across the league. In other words, the WNBA was already managing one live wire in public, and then this landed right on top of it, and the response was to go quiet. 2 days after the incident, Carrington tried to walk it back. She posted a longer explanation, writing that she never claimed the officiating call itself was white privilege, and pushing back on what she described as people misreading her original post. She pointed to her academic background again as the reason she felt qualified to use the phrase in the first place. Whether that explanation landed the way she wanted is its own separate debate. What isn't debatable is the timing. It came 2 full days after the story had already formed, hardened, and traveled to every corner of sports media without it. The correction showed up after the narrative had already been written in its absence, and that gap between what she says she meant and what nearly everyone scrolling past 2 unexplained words actually took from them is exactly why this story had the shelf life it did. Intent and reception are not the same thing, and no clarification after the fact fully closes that distance once the damage is already out there. With the league staying silent, the pressure didn't disappear. It just found louder voices with a lot less patience for careful non-answers. Fox News columnist Joe Concha called for a season-long suspension, framing the foul itself as deliberate and politically motivated and tying it directly to the backlash Cunningham has already faced over her public comments on transgender athletes. Analyst Aaron Torres went even further, saying it might be time for Adam Silver himself to step in and address how the league is handling this. Emmanuel Acho added his own voice too, publicly calling out the post and telling Carrington directly that she cannot frame that specific foul as white privilege. Now here's something that needs to be said plainly, because it's getting lost in all the noise. None of those calls for Silver to intervene means Silver has actually done anything here. He hasn't commented on the Cunningham-Carrington situation at all. His most recent public remarks about the WNBA this year were about league finances, where he's previously acknowledged the NBA has absorbed significant annual losses just to keep the WNBA running, plus a carefully neutral answer earlier this season about whether Commissioner Engelbert will still be in her job after this year. His exact position being that he simply hasn't had that conversation with her yet, even while praising the work she's done. That distinction matters, because it's exactly why so many people keep pointing upward toward the NBA whenever something like this happens. The NBA isn't some distant cousin organization to the WNBA. It's the financial backbone underneath it. Roughly 40% of WNBA revenue flows through the NBA by some public estimates. Another fifth belongs to outside investors who came in through a capital raise a few years back, and whatever's left gets split between the teams and the players. Silver has said publicly that the NBA absorbs real financial losses year over year to keep the women's league operating. So when an organization is that financially entangled with another, and a controversy this loud plays out while the smaller league's front office goes almost completely silent, it's not exactly a stretch that people start asking whether the organization with the deeper pockets and the bigger platform should be the one to break that silence. Especially when the growth of that smaller league is the entire justification for the investment in the first place. And that growth has been very real. WNBA franchise valuations, viewership, and social engagement have all climbed sharply over the past 2 seasons. Fever road games are close to sellouts across the board. National broadcast numbers are up across the league. A huge slice of that new audience showed up because of Caitlin Clark, because of Cunningham, because of exactly this kind of high-stakes, high-emotion basketball that pulls in people who weren't paying attention to this league 2 years ago. A bigger audience means a bigger spotlight on how the league actually handles a moment like this one. And right now, that spotlight is landing on a 4-figure fine and almost 2 weeks of institutional silence. Here's the simplest way to put what this entire story is really about. Every single day, the WNBA doesn't clarify its own standard for the foul, for the post, for what handled is even supposed to mean in a situation like this, is another day where columnists, analysts, and fans get to fill that silence with their own version of events. Some of those versions are fair, some are clearly reaching, but the league doesn't get to choose which version sticks if it isn't willing to say anything itself. That's the actual risk here, not one fine, not one suspension, not whether Carrington sits one more game or 20. The real risk is what happens when an institution goes quiet long enough that the story gets written entirely without it, and then has to live with whatever version of itself that story ends up creating. Cunningham handled all of this with more composure than anyone had a right to expect from a player in her position. She named her own history without being asked to, drew a straight line from her 2025 ejection to this one, and effectively dared anyone to explain the difference. She answered the basketball question and the far harder cultural question in the same breath, and walked away from that podium having controlled the one part of this entire story that was actually hers to control. Carrington's clarification came 2 days too late. Not because her underlying academic argument has no basis, it does, but because 2 words with no context tagged directly at the opposing team, minutes after hitting one of their players across the head and neck, will always be read as a direct accusation by almost everyone scrolling past it. That gap between what someone intends and what people actually receive is not something a follow-up post can fully undo once the first version of the story has already traveled that far. The league's response satisfied essentially nobody. Not the people who thought Carrington's conduct deserved a suspension. Not the people who suspected the fine itself was a quiet way of penalizing the post without ever having to say so out loud. Not the journalists who had to explain a $1,000 fine as the entire institutional response to a 48-hour national firestorm. And definitely not the fans who watched Carrington check back into a game 2 nights later as if none of it had ever happened. So the question hanging over all of this now is whether the organization running this league actually has the stomach to do what a moment like this requires. The WNBA is bigger than it has ever been. Its audience is newer and wider than it has ever been. And the standard it sets here, on race, on intent, on accountability, on one hard foul and 2 words and a whole lot of silence, is going to be the thing this new audience remembers. Wind up, impact, follow through. That's the exact standard the league used to make the call on the court that ended Carrington's night. The real question now is whether that same standard applies off the court too, because the impact already landed and the follow-through still hasn't come. Silence doesn't stay neutral forever. Eventually, silence becomes its own answer, and this league is running out of time before that becomes the only story left to tell.